So Jerry Mander started out as an ad man and later was a partner in the firm of Freeman, Mander, and Gossage. Jerry's remarkable career has included starting a nonprofit advertising firm, who ever heard of that, right? Whose ads for saving the Grand Canyon from being dammed went viral and were part of a successful campaign long before we used that term viral. He has served as executive director of the Foundation for Deep Ecology and currently directs the influential International Forum on Globalization, which he also founded. Jerry's appeared in 7 documentaries, including, as I said before, A Fierce Green Fire. His 8 books include 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television, a New York Times bestseller, still being read, and his most recent, which he'll talk about tonight, The Capitalism Papers, Fatal Flaws of an Obsolete System. Please join me in welcoming Jerry Mander.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah. This has been a great evening for me. I'm so impressed. This is my second 99% event. Karen Mander invited me to speak a few months ago. I went for a Saturday morning event, and that was fabulous. And I'm so impressed.
Hold it closer to your mic.
I'm so very impressed with all that you're all doing. It's amazing. And I did approach this with a little bit of trepidation tonight because at a certain point I was told that I would be following Will Durst. Years ago in the 60s, I worked for a group called The Committee. Do any of you remember that? Chair for review. And I found myself on stage several times with Larry Hankin and Gary Goodrow and even Mort Saul. And that was a dreadful experience. I just didn't know how to keep up with those people or how to be funny. I'm really not a funny guy. So I hope you'll all bear with me as I plot through what I've said. I want to congratulate the organization on addressing the question of capitalism. Curiously, it hasn't been mentioned all night tonight, the word. I kept thinking, well, we're going to hear capitalism at some point. But we're out of the habit of talking about capitalism as a subject that needs to be discussed for its own sake and sort of deconstruct it so we understand its ingredients and what kind of role it's playing. But it's hard to talk about it in this society because it's such a sensitive word, and it's like almost a third rail of discourse. You start talking about it, and pretty soon you're sort of out of the group. You know, it's like it's like a death penalty to talk about it. But we got talking about it about 5 years ago is when I really got interested in the subject. We had a meeting that IFG sponsored with 35 economists. These were a mixed group of economists. There were quite a few progressive economists, a couple of Marxists, some socialists, and also some mainstream kind of liberal economists. And we spent 3 days together, and the subject was, is capitalism soon over? That was the topic. This was in 2008. Actually, while we were meeting, the most disastrous catastrophe started happening. I don't think we had anything to do with it, but it started happening, and people started watching on their cell phones what was going on in the crashing of the economy and so on. And we started to put together a sort of a statement about what we thought was going to be the future of capitalism, and of course we were going to advise that we ought to work to abandon the system, that it's not salvageable, that it's obsolete. And we were doing that, and a couple of the economists, and these are very good friends of mine, a couple of these guys, they're kind of radical economists. You all know their names. I'm not going to mention who they were. I've read all their books. Their books are fierce critiques of capitalism, but never mentioned the word once. They never used the word capitalism ever in their books. And they use free market fundamentalism or various other kind of ways of saying what the system is without saying the name of the system. And so we said, well, they stood up at the end of this meeting, and toward the end of the meeting, they said, if we're going to issue a statement against capitalism, then they have to leave. But we said, what are you talking about? We've read all your books, we know where you stand, but you haven't used the word capitalism. This is a good chance to kind of name the subject. And they said, well, it'll marginalize us. So we said, but we're marginalized now. Let's at least say what it is we're really talking about. But no, they left and so on, and it kind of, the meeting sort of evolved into something a little different. And then a couple of weeks later, I was attending the Environmental Grantmakers meeting in Washington, D.C., and Bill Moyers was speaking. And Bill Moyers made a speech, and he started talking about the importance of naming the name of what you're against. And he quoted Socrates, who wrote and spoke about that very point. Socrates said I'm not quoting exactly, but he said that if there's a thing that you're against, you've got to give it a name, and you've got to call it by name, and you've got to keep saying it over and over and over again. And then Moyer said, so he's going to name it, he called it plutocracy. That wasn't the name I wanted him to call it, but that was good. He had the right idea. But at that point I said, I'm going to write a book. I've written a couple of books, and I'm going to put it out there. And not only that, but I'm going to speak about its inherent, I'm going to try to deconstruct it. I'm going to try to do a kind of primer, that would help people to see the ingredients of it, that it wasn't just a word, that it had characteristics, and that these characteristics really made it impossible for it to be reformed, impossible for it to ever really further the ideals of ecological sustainability or social justice or true democracy. And it's not that capitalism didn't have its day. Capitalism's like a lot of other systems. When it came along, it had a kind of role to play. It sort of functioned well in the context of a world filled with abundant resources and slave labor and
details.
A lot of colonial domination and new markets. Well, it in that context functioned well. It produced, it increased wealth for a lot of people. It raised standards of living, generally speaking. But that doesn't mean that it's functioning well now, or that it's the right system for now. And I decided to do a primer, really explaining some of the characteristics of capitalism and why it was a system which now is obsolete, and why it's intrinsically, fundamentally non-reformable, and to name the structural elements, and to say if we're serious about building an economic system that respects the boundaries of nature and works toward a more equitable and democratic society, that there's no future for capitalism. And we may as well start saying that.
Good.
That's the basic argument of the book, is that while capitalism could thrive in its early years, in the 1700s and 1900s, let's say, when we had these abundant resources, cheap labor or slave labor, those days are over, and it's now non-malleable, non-reformable, and we need to start speaking about what's wrong with it. So, I made the book has 7 arguments in it. I wrote a book some years ago that I know a lot of you have read because people keep coming up to me saying that. So it's a piece about called 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. Yep. And the publisher of this book said, let's call it 7 Arguments for the Elimination of Capitalism. And I said, no, let's not do that because it'll be too associated with the other book, and let's let people approach it. I think that was a mistake. It would have been commercially more viable that way. But I'm going to name the 7. I won't have time to deconstruct all of these things, but I'll at least name the 7 subjects that the book takes up. 1 is the necessity of capitalism for endless, non-stop growth on a finite planet. This is the environmental catastrophe that is capitalism. Now, I will speak a little bit more about that. Second is intrinsic immorality. It operates without sets of values. The only value is growth and profit. There is no other value, and I'll go into that a little further. The third is that structures are all rigidly hierarchical. You can't have capitalism without hierarchical structures. And you can have co-ops. And there's a movement for co-ops, but those are not really capitalism. They're really something different than that. The fourth is that capitalism must control the governments that otherwise control it. That capitalism has to take over the government, which we've certainly seen in the United States already. The fifth is that it has to control public consciousness. I mean, I wrote a book about television, so I can tell you that a very, very small number of institutions control almost all of the media in the world. I mean, right now it's I think it's 7 corporations control 75% of all media. That's all media. It's not just television, that's all media. I'll get to that a little bit later if I have time. That it has, the sixth is that it has a natural propensity toward war. That is to say, toward militarism and war, and the United States, which is the main laissez-faire capitalist country, is expressing that very, very, very vehemently right now. And the seventh is that all the research now in the world on happiness shows the U.S., the main advocate of laissez-faire free market capitalism, is very low on the list of countries as people self-report whether they're having a happy life or not. It's down in the middle of the bunch, and a whole lot of countries that are less capitalistic are very much on top. And if I have time, I'll go into that. Day after day, we hear the economy discussed from all sides of the political equation in exactly the same way. Whether it's Obama, or Boehner, or Rachel Maddow, or Rush Limbaugh, or Fox News, or NPR, or Paul Krugman, or Karl Rove, even Robert Wright, everybody is trying to figure out just one thing: how to revive rapid economic growth. Left and right, they all agree on this. How to build and sell more cars, how to build more new houses, how to get housing prices to rise, how to convert more open fields into shopping malls, how to expand energy supplies, how to control foreign resources, how to increase investments, bank lending, exports, blah, blah, blah. Most of all, how to increase shopping. Capitalism to succeed, growth must continue at a high rate to achieve increased sales and increased profits and attract a steady stream of new investment. You can think of the whole system as a Ponzi scheme. Today's expansion and profits are the returns on earlier investments. Tomorrow's profits and growth depend upon new investments today. The circle must never diminish. At the first sign that investment slows, as we saw in the last 5 years from starting in 2008, the whole thing starts to crash like a house of cards. But really, can this go on forever? How many cars can be built and bought and thrown away? How many houses can cover the landscape? Where does it all come from? The kicker in the whole story is that there's a missing link that's left out of the whole discussion. The missing link is nature. People behave as if our economic system was a self-contained, separate entity residing in its own detached universe, unconnected to realities outside itself, rather than embodied in a much larger system from which it evolved and cannot escape. Nature, the planet. Nature cannot be left out. Economic growth is largely made out of nature. Everything in this room, look around, including the tables and chairs and walls and clothes you're wearing, your cell phones, etc., that are in your pocket, were originally nature. Even this shirt was once in the ground. My shirt is made partly of polyester. Polyester is made of oil. Oil used to be trees, dinosaurs, plants, sunlight. The whole economy is rooted in the transformation of nature. Dug up, mined, processed, shipped around, commodified, bought and sold. What we call economics is the process of transforming elements of the natural world into the tools and commodities of human activity, then betting in stock markets and other financial markets on the rates that we can continue to do it or expand it. To leave nature out of that equation, as we've been doing, is suicide. Eric Zenzi, an economist from New York, said, the financial crisis is the environmental crisis.
Yeah.
We already see the outcome. Climate change, ozone depletion, loss of arable soils, loss of fresh water, the oncoming death of the oceans and wild fish stocks, depletion of forests, coral reefs, shortage of such crucial minerals as coltan, lithium, rare earths, all the high-tech stuff, zinc, phosphorus, iron ore, copper, tin, platinum, cobalt, not to mention oil, and the awful extinction of thousands of species. All of it's a testimony to the craziness and unworkability of this system. We live on a finite planet, and the end is in sight. I don't have time to go much further into the details of that, and many of you are already active in that area, but the book has a lot of it. But listen, plutocrats know this. That's one reason that investment dollars are now less inclined to go toward what economists call the real economy of manufactured goods and services. There aren't enough cheap resources to keep going with those bets, and more toward the virtual economy, money investing in financial instruments, money investing in money, or better yet, investing in controlling governments and controlling elections, which may have the greatest financial return of all. That's the stage we have reached right now. Or it goes toward the military, or it goes toward what's called the remake of nature, you know, the bioengineering, geoengineering, all of the rebuilding of the natural world. There's a big movement in favor of that, of redoing nature as an economic strategy. This is not a solvable problem. If we have capitalism operating on a large scale, we need rapid growth, just like Obama and Bush and Romney and Clinton all said. But continuous rapid growth, it's no longer possible on a finite planet. So, in chapter 7 of the book, chapter 8 of the book, I do have a little rundown of what the new concepts that it's just a very abbreviated 30-page list of new concepts of how to think about the future economy. And one of the things I talked about a lot are steady-state economic systems. In other words, systems that don't grow but actually deplete a little bit. And local democracy and sustainable systems. I'll try to have time to get into a little bit of that at the end, in fact, if I have time. But I want to go into a little bit part 2, which is amorality. You know, lots of people say that one of the problems with capitalism is greed. And you know, you can't say that's not true. But I tend to think we're avoiding a concept. I tend to think it's almost more of a systemic greed than the kind of greed we're used to, which is you wanting more. Now inside the system, a lot of people are like that, they do want more. But the system itself is built to be greedy. The system requires greed. Systemically requires greed. How many saw the movie Avatar? There's a scene in that movie that I think is one of the great scenes. I didn't love the movie. Parts of it I didn't like. It's too much white Messiah stuff. But there are some great things in it. And one of the things that was great was, remember the scene where the corporate guy, you know, the corporation is sending a spaceship out to try to find, the planet has used up all its resources. So, which is interesting that they do a movie like that. And they're out in space visiting other planets to try to find more resources. And so the corporate guy on the spaceship is out, now I'm forgetting the name of the planet that it is, but Pandora. And they're out circling Pandora, and they can tell by their instruments that there are real resources on that planet. But the problem is, there are a lot of Indians on that planet. They've been living there for thousands of years. So the corporate guy in the spaceship says to his military guy, they have a military group traveling with them, if you remember, he says, go down there and tell the Indians that they have to move. They have to move around to the back of the planet or go to another planet. And so the military guy goes down there and he talks to them, and then he radios back the corporate guy and he says, they don't want to move. They refuse to move, which of course is a classical, situation with Indian people who are told to get off their lands. But they don't want to move. What should I do? Should I kill them all? And then there's a moment where the film kind of pauses, and the corporate guy starts thinking about that. Kill all these people? You know, maybe our shareholders won't like it if we kill all these people. But on the other hand, they'll care more about their quarterly report than they will about whether we'll kill all the people. So he finally decides, yes, let's kill all the people. Go ahead and kill them all. And then a war starts. And actually, the Indians survive with the help of a lot of white turncoats who join with them because they fall in love with the women. That's the white messiah stuff. But I thought that was really interesting because what it showed was what I've learned to call corporate schizophrenia. I write about it in another book, In the Absence of the Sacred. Corporate schizophrenia. I mean, people who are in corporations and who run corporations are people. They're maybe your neighbors. Their kids are in the same school, and they go to the same church. You may like them when you run into them at the store. And they're human beings. They have feelings. And very often, they care about the kinds of things that are happening. But when they're inside that corporate construct, they can't care about it. It's not allowed. You have to move toward doing what's good for the corporate purpose, for growth and for shareholders and so on. That's corporate schizophrenia. You know, we saw it also in the great, remember when the Exxon Valdez spilled all its oil off Alaska, and Union Carbide had this horrible thing happen in India? Those are very interesting cases of corporate schizophrenia, because in both of those cases, the heads, the CEOs of the corporations went on television. In each case, they're not related. They're separate cases within a few months of each other. And they both said, I am horrified at this. I feel so bad. I feel terrible. People have been injured. The environment's been hurt. Animals are killed. In Bhopal, thousands of people may die. I feel really, 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 really terrible about this. I feel so bad, I'm going to devote the rest of my life to fixing this. They both said that. Then within 3 months, they were both hiring law firms, fighting these cases, turning it completely around. And it's, in the case of Bhopal, it hasn't been settled yet. It's still being fought. 20 years ago. That's a 20-year-old thing. So, what is that? That is, at first they reacted like people. Like, oh my God, I caused this. This is a terrible, terrible thing. I'm so sad. But then the board of directors call them up and say, you can't say that. You can't do that. Our stock has dropped 200 points since you started saying things like that. You're not allowed to say that. You have to reverse that, and then they have to reverse it. So that's this corporate schizophrenia. And it's built into the structure of the corporation, requiring that it always act in behalf of its economic interests. There's no other value. If you want to have another value, you're fired. You're out. So they replace you with somebody else. I had an amazing incident happen to me not too long ago. I was involved in, it was long ago. I was involved with Alvin Duskin. How many of you remember Alvin Duskin? For a while, he was a very, very great activist in San Francisco against high-rise, against overdevelopment and so on. And I worked with him on those campaigns. And we tried to stop this big development along the Embarcadero. So we really worked very, very hard on it. And it was the project of the Rockefeller Industries from Chicago. And we were losing this battle, but there was a lot of public protest and battles on it. Coincidentally, one day, a friend of my wife and mine, named Melissa Gold, Herb Gold's ex-wife, who later married Bill Green, called up and said her father's going to be in town, and she'd love to bring the kids over. We can hang out in the garden, have breakfast together, and she likes to meet her father, and the kids get along really well. So how about that? So on Sunday we got together in the garden in front of the house, and we met her father, and he was a wonderful guy, very entertaining, charming, and so on. Only later did we realize. Only later. Well, let me say it this way. Only later did we realize that this was J. Richardson Dilworth. Her father was J. Richardson Dilworth. We never scored. He was the president of Rockefeller Industries. And here he was sitting in the garden. A wonderful man. Very entertaining, tuned in, you know. And at one point in the morning, he looks at next door to our house. We lived on Russian Hill at the time. And there was a construction going on next door. And he said, what's going on over there? What are they going to do? And we said, oh, well, an old couple in their 90s died recently, and they had a beautiful, incredible garden out back. And now, since they died, the house got sold, and they're building a 40-unit apartment building there.
Wow.
He said, 40-unit apartment building? Well, that's going to be terrible for the neighborhood. How could you allow that? And we said, well, we really can't. And then I thought, well, he's the father of a friend of ours. Am I going to make a political thing out of this? So I finally said, Mr. Dilworth, I have to say, I'm one of the people who's opposing your big project down on the Embarcadero for the very reasons that you think we're opposed to this house over here. And he said, oh, is that so? He says, I didn't know there was opposition to that project. So maybe he didn't, because if you're the head of a giant corporation that has 100 projects going, it's all numbers passing through, some other people are running, maybe he didn't know. So I told him. I explained what was going on, I explained what the opposition is about, and so on. And he said, that's very interesting. I really want to know more about it. I said, would you please send me a complete report on this? And here's my private card, my private email, my private phone number. Here's the name of my private secretary. Send it to me in a few days, and I'll get right back to you about it. So Alvin and I gathered up all this stuff, and we sent it to J. Richardson Dilworth in Chicago, and we get an answer. Then we wrote him again. Said, oh, we sent you this stuff, maybe it didn't arrive. When can we talk? We'd love to talk. No answer. Then we waited another week or two. Sent one more letter, no answer. We wrote the private secretary, no answer. So, it's corporate schizophrenia. The human being cares, the institution doesn't care. And that's a very giant flaw of the system. It's like the amorality that's built into that process is. Now, I just want to make a distinction, though, between giant corporations and capitalism as we know it, operating on a very, very large scale, and You know, in the very beginning of my book, I talk about how somebody in a meeting like this raised their hand and said, "Are you really against my grandfather's grocery store or my grandfather's furniture shop or the coffee shop I go to down the street?" Something. I'm not. Scale matters. In other words, I think that we should not think of people who run their grocery stores as small businesses or local businesses, locally run businesses, or things that are for the local neighborhood or where people get together and so on. They're not the same creature as corporate capitalism, especially when involved in investment, especially in investor-based corporate. We have to call one thing, and another thing, the other thing. I'm a very strong advocate of naming capitalism, not naming somebody's coffee shop or small business or neighborhood-run enterprise as capitalism, or at least some other kind of capitalism. So, but the larger scale institutions that are abstractly controlled by people who don't have anything to do with it, they're just basically looking at the money, and it's all about the money. It can't really, we can't really live with it. Okay, so that's really all I have time for. I think I'm already over time. But the seven, you know, I'll just review that the endless growth on the planet, amorality, corporate hierarchy, there's a lot to say about that. We talk about 1%, 99%. 80% of the planet is organized through corporations with hierarchies, or 70%, whatever it is, rigid hierarchies. That's what we live in. We live in a hierarchical world. And so, the hierarchy gets more and more distant. The people at the top are more and more distant from the people at the bottom, and the consequences are what we increasingly see now. Control of government, control of consciousness, I don't have time to go into that, militarization, and unhappiness. These are all the primary ingredients of capitalism. And the book goes into questions of how do we think about alternatives, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it to you to investigate that further.